the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Bill. I will ask the Clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly agrees the extension to Northern Ireland of certain provisions within the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Bill relating to the interference with unmanned aircraft drones over places of detention.
Thank you. I call on the Minister of Justice to move the motion. Minister. Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed that there should be no time limit on this debate, so please open the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and congratulations on your temporary appointment to your new role. This bill was originally introduced to Parliament in the autumn of 2019, but fell prior to the general election. It was subsequently reintroduced in January 2020. The bill started its parliamentary passage in the House of Lords and is currently at report stage there. It covers three aspects of civil aviation, which, as members know, is a reserved matter under our devolution settlement. These aspects are the modernisation of civil aviation in order to deliver quicker, cleaner and quieter flights, the modernisation of the licensing framework for air traffic control, and the conferring of new powers that will allow police and prison authorities across the UK to tackle the unlawful use of unmanned aircraft. The provisions relevant to the LCM are contained within the last of those three. The bill plans to allow the designation of senior officials in the Ministry of Justice, the Scottish Prison Service and my department, who in turn will be able to authorise applications from staff in their custodial institutions to interfere with unmanned aircraft over such institutions. While essentially a reserved matter and one overseen by the Civil Aviation Authority, the fact that the bill will confer an ancillary new power on the Department of Justice has led to the Department for Transport and the Northern Ireland Office legal advisers to conclude that an LCM is required to cover this particular and narrow aspect. I understand the Department for Transport has taken a similar view in relation to Scotland. These authorisations may only be given if the authorising officer believes it is to prevent or detect offences as set out in the various UK prison acts, including the Prison Act Northern Ireland 1953. These offences are referenced directly in the bill and include assisting in escape or conveying unauthorised articles into a place of detention. Currently, such applications have to be approved by a police chief constable. However, the UK Government has taken the view that allowing these authorisation requests to be dealt with by senior departmental officials will allow a custodial institution in the country to take rapid action against real-time drone incidents rather than making urgent, repetitive and recurring applications to senior police officers, responses to which have sometimes been delayed in England and Wales due to other policing pressures. The part of the bill covering the use of unmanned aircraft is considered necessary because of a number of factors, including the shutting of Gatwick Airport in December 2018 due to drone activity and numerous incidents in and around prisons across England, Wales and Scotland where unmanned aircraft have been used to convey items such as drugs, weapons and mobile phones. I also note that prisons in the Republic of Ireland have reported a recent rise in similar problems. The importation of such items place both prisoners and staff at risk, impact on the good order and security of establishments, and in turn undermine the rehabilitation of people in our care. It is also possible that drones may be used in the future to facilitate an escape, again posing a direct threat to public safety and prison security. To date, there have been no reported incidents of drone use in Northern Ireland in the vicinity of our custodial institutions. However, I am keen to take the opportunity this bill is presenting to future-proof us against a rise in such activity for criminal purposes, and in doing so, give my senior managers and their staff the same opportunity and ability to act quickly and in real time against drones as their counterparts in the rest of the UK. Members will appreciate that we are somewhat out of step with the normal process. Generally, Executive and Justice Committee approval should have been in place prior to the bill being introduced in Parliament. In this case, my department was unable to follow this convention, as the Assembly was not sitting at that time. However, my Permanent Secretary's agreement in principle was obtained. On the return of the Assembly, officials sought my views. I subsequently wrote to the Chair of the Justice Committee at the earliest opportunity and also sought approval from the Executive. This was granted on the 2nd of March. The Justice Committee considered extending these provisions to Northern Ireland at their meeting on the 14th of May and gave formal approval on the 28th of May. I believe that given the fact this bill is, in its entirety, relating to reserved matters, it would not have been possible to legislate locally on this matter. Westminster colleagues are keen to have the request considered at the earliest opportunity, and I am therefore keen to seek legislative consent today, but I am of course also willing to hear the views of this Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker, and I see you're in your place, and I see the other Temporary Speaker is here in the chamber as well, so I'm not sure when we're going to get the privilege of Mr Wells admonishing members for bad behaviour, but I look forward to his opportunity. It's certainly the Club of 98 is a very exclusive club. Whenever I read the Speaker's letter, and there's not many of them left, but I'm sure Mr Wells will discharge the duties of the office with great aplomb. I look forward to seeing him in the chair too. No reflection on you, Mr Temporary Speaker. Well, can I just say that I'm pleased to speak on behalf of the Committee for Justice in this debate today. The Department of Justice, as the Minister has indicated, did write to the Committee in March to advise of a proposed legislative consent motion for the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Bill. The bill aims to tackle the fast-growing problems that are associated with unmanned aircraft, more commonly known as drones, and members will recall the problems caused by the drone activity around Gatwick Airport in December of 2018. Drones have also been used around prisons in England, Wales and Scotland to convey drugs, mobile phones, weapons and equipment to facilitate the escape of prisoners. The bill extends across the United Kingdom, and as civil aviation is a reserved matter, legislative consent is not required in respect of many of its provisions. The LCM that we are discussing today is, however, necessary to enable senior Northern Ireland Prison Service and Youth Justice Agency staff the authorisation for counter-drone measures in relation to unlawful use of drones near custodial institutions. The Department of Justice advised the Committee that the use of drones seen across other parts of the United Kingdom around places of detention has to date been rare in this jurisdiction. Nonetheless, this bill provides an opportunity to future-proof against a potential rise in this type of drone activity. Mr Speaker, the Committee considered the Department of Justice written briefing at its meeting on the 14th of May. It agreed that it wasn't necessary to have an oral briefing or indeed further written information in respect of the proposed LCM. At its meeting on the 28th of May, the Committee considered the memorandum laid by the Department of Justice on the 22nd of May and agreed that it was content with the proposal to extend provision in the Air Traffic and Unmanned Aircraft Bill relating to the interference with drones over places of detention to Northern Ireland by way of an LCM. While content with the legislative consent motion, the Committee requested clarification from the Department on whether drones or indeed the institutions to which this LCM will apply are required to be registered and the process for this. The Committee agreed that requesting this information should not delay the progress of the LCM, and it approved the report on its consideration of the issue on the 4th of June. The Department has subsequently written to the Committee on the 17th of June, advising that from the 30th of November 2018, all drones operated across the United Kingdom with a mass of 250 grams or more must have a valid certificate of registration, and the registration number must be displayed on the aircraft. The remote pilot must also have a valid acknowledgement of competency. Both the certificates of registration and acknowledgements of competency are issued by the Civil Aviation Authority. The Department also advised that in Northern Ireland the provisions of the bill relating to the interference with unmanned aircraft apply to a prison, a young offender centre, a remand centre and a juvenile justice centre, along with areas adjoining the boundaries of these institutions that are considered necessary and appropriate by the authorising officer. So, Mr Speaker, I can confirm, as set out in the Committee report, that the Committee for Justice supports the Minister of Justice in seeking the Assembly's endorsement of the legislative consent motion. Speaking briefly as a member of the House, Mr Speaker, not to comment any more on the substance of the report that the Committee provided. It is a new and emerging issue in respect of unmanned aircraft, or drones as the public more commonly refer to them. And it's one where I have no doubt this Assembly will want to consider in the future. There is certainly anecdotal evidence of some public concern about the use of drones. I myself, on a daily exercise walk around Stonyford Reservoir. Walking with my family, a drone flew overhead, not knowing where it was being controlled from, who was taking it, for what purposes, and where indeed any imagery may well appear. And just in that own personal experience made me consider what are the issues here around privacy and control and the monitoring of this, as it becomes a very fashionable toy for people to be buying and using. And I do think it's an issue that now, having looked at this in terms of the purposes of custodial institutions, there is a broader public interest when it comes to the use of drones in our society and how that is being regulated and managed. Not for today, but I do think it's a novel issue that we're going to have to look at in the future. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, Mr. Temporary Speaker.
I call Linda Dillon.
And can I join with the Chair in congratulating you on your appointment and wish you the very best. I'm not going to repeat everything that's already been said. There really is limited things to be said in relation to this LCM. Our party supports it, the committee supports it, and I think it really is non-controversial, but may well become something that will be more controversial in the future. I think that the Chair is right. There are some issues around it, around privacy. I would like to think that the same things that apply in relation to if somebody took your photograph just in the street, that, the same rules would apply around where they can be used. But we will have to look at this, I have no doubt, in the future. And I think that the Minister was right to bring this before the House in terms of future-proofing or having future-proof legislation. So that's all I have to say on the matter. I'm not going to keep people any longer than we have to.
I call Sinead Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Temporary Speaker. I too won't add to what the committee report, which has been quite thorough, and the Minister's statement preceding it. It is about future-proofing, and I just wish to place on record the SDLP support today for the Minister on this. It's an important piece, and it potentially is a first step in a much wider debate. So I'd just like to record that today, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Call Jerry Carroll.
Speaker, I just want to make a couple of brief points about this LCM, because there's a little opportunity to scrutinise, obviously, the LCM and the legislation, and especially for opposition MLAs in the Chamber. So I want to make some brief comments about this legislation just before it goes forward. I mean, obviously, in the main, it relates to the bestowing of extra powers to allow security services to deal with air traffic control, and in particular, the flying of drones over prisons to combat drug use. Firstly, I want to make a basic point about this, that even if this LCM was successfully implemented, it's highly unlikely to actually thwart or combat the use of drug use in our society, and by extension in our prisons. I think if you look at the US, for example, who are fighting a so-called war on drugs for many years with much vigour, through strengthening police powers and increasingly criminalising drug use, they're clearly not winning the war. And quite the opposite. In fact, they're losing it, and I believe that tells us a lot of how we challenge the many problems that come with drug use in society. No one doubts, of course, the problems that do come with drug use and its damaging impact on our society generally, and in prisons in particular, but I would suggest a very different approach is needed, one that prioritises tackling poverty and the conditions that breed both small-scale criminality and drug use, as well as rehabilitation programmes ahead of strengthening police and security operations. Maybe a conversation, Mr. Speaker, for another day. But for the purpose of this item, I feel it's important to point out that the Department itself actually recognises that the drone flying over prisons hasn't really been an issue here in the North. The Department's own report for the Justice Committee, for example, stated that, I quote, the use of drones in Northern Ireland around places of detention has to date been rare, and therefore the legislation suggests a potential strengthening of police powers without any real evidence that is actually needed here. So I would like the Minister to maybe comment to expand upon and address that point. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would add that any strengthening of police powers always runs a risk of intensifying the already existing problems of policing here. For example, I note the same report, while sufficiently vague, states that its intention is to introduce powers of stop and search. As an MLA for West Belfast, where stop and search powers have been used and abused in the past, I believe it does constitute a harmful and unnecessary impingement on the rights of people, including children and minors. A lack of way, I'm finishing my comments. Considering the problematic history of stop and search as used, you've plenty of time to speak yourself if you want. I do not believe that any form of additional stop and search powers or strengthening these powers could be justified in the current context, especially with no perceived threat in existence, as the report suggests, and I want to put this on the record. Just to close, Mr Speaker, I think it's my duty throughout this discussion to state my concern with how stop and search powers have been used in the past in the City, and I urge the Minister to consider this and work to ensure that such a similar situation doesn't arise in the future. Thank you.
If no further members wish to speak, I would ask the Minister, Ms Naomi Long, to conclude and wind up in the debate.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank members for considering the motion and for all of the valuable contributions to the debate. I want to place on record my thanks to the Justice Committee and to the work that they have done in terms of their report, and to executive colleagues for their consideration of the issues presented in this LCM. I think the Chair of the Committee expressed clearly the work that had been done in terms of scrutinising the extent of this bill and also the need for this LCM. With respect to the issue of drug use and rehabilitation within our prisons, and it is within our prisons that we are addressing today, as opposed to the wider issues, which would be a matter for myself, the Department of Health and others indeed to work collaboratively on. But with respect to the issue within our prison system, we do not take a single-pronged approach. It is not simply about preventing drugs entering the prisons, though that is a serious part of the strategy, but it is also about ensuring that the right support and rehabilitation and interventions are available in our prisons in order to support those who are seeking to stop their addictions and to deal with their addictions and learn alternative ways to manage their health issues. And I think it's important that we stress that, because for me it is important that those who come out of the prison system equipped to actually survive and thrive in normal society. And I think that that is a big part of it, is dealing with addictions, mental health issues and other issues which perhaps have not been dealt with adequately before they entered the prison system. With respect to why we are going forward with this legislation, I think first of all we should not assume that Northern Ireland is in some way immune to the problems that are being reported elsewhere. We have seen a rapid increase in the number of drone incidents across England and Wales. We have seen an increase in Scotland, and we have seen this kind of activity now developing in prisons in the south of Ireland. And I think that it is a sensible thing for this Assembly to do and for the Government to do, to ensure that the powers are there, that if this becomes an issue in our prisons, and I would caveat that by saying that obviously if nobody flies drones over prisons, these powers will not be required because they're only for use in those specific circumstances. But if this becomes an issue, it is important that we can respond in a way that keeps the prisoners safe, that keeps our prison officers safe and maintains good order within the prisons. To be clear, we are not strengthening police powers in this bill. These powers belong to the Civil Aviation Authority, and it is already the power of the police to be able to say that those drones can be intercepted. The issue here is that in doing so it can take some time, and by then it may be too late to intercept the drone in question. So what we're actually doing is taking powers from the police and devolving them to those institutions where they will make the most impact. And so I don't think we need to overly concern ourselves with police powers. This is about local action to protect prisoners, to protect prison staff, and to ensure that people are kept safe when they're in our care. I would therefore ask the House again to support the passing of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Point of order, yep.
I just thank the Minister for clarifying the issue in relation to the police powers, but also we will be checking the Hansard record of the comments made by the member for West Belfast in terms of inaccuracy in relation to the issue of stop and search, which is not relevant to this debate, but I just want to place on record, given the independent scrutiny there has been of that particular issue and hasn't been found to be consistent with the comments that have been made by the member in the House this afternoon.
That's so placed on record. The next item on the order paper is a legislative consent motion for the Domestic Abuse Bill. I will ask the Clerk to read the motion.